Welcome to Criterion Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be going over 10 underrated Criterion films. So it's been a while since I've done a Criterion review channel segment. I've been focusing more on random movie reviews, and I realize some people may be disappointed by that because I initially started just doing Criterion movie reviews, but I just want to talk about movies in general. I love movies. As I mentioned in my 10 underrated films review, I was going to do the same thing with Criterion movies, and the criteria I used for the original underrated movie review was IMDb ratings. Well, with Criterion movies, it's going to be a little bit trickier. Basically, how I'm rating how these movies are underrated is based on what I've seen and what I've heard. I watch a lot of people buy Criterion movies off of the Barnes & Noble half-off sale. I watch a lot of people talk about it on YouTube, on a Facebook forum I follow. And these are just 10 movies that I feel like I should recommend to Criterion collectors. When it comes to Criterion collectors, they almost always go for the big ones. Anything by Bergman, Tarkovsky, Kurosawa, Wes Anderson. So using that kind of criteria, knowing what the big Criterion purchases are, I'm like, well, let me pick 10 movies that I feel like a lot of people don't actively seek out, and 10 movies that I would highly recommend. Also, these are not ranked in any specific order. These are just 10 recommendations specifically for Criterion Blu-ray collectors. All of these films are Blu-ray, and I believe all of them should still be in print. Don't quote me on that. All right, so with all that being said, let's start with the first one, and that is Blood Simple, The Coen Brothers. This is the Coen Brothers' first movie. It's very much in the same vein of like a No Country for Old Men. It's really great, really dark neo-noir thriller with some kind of slasher movie elements, since this movie was released at a time where slasher movies were super popular. One of the things missing from this movie is the Coen Brothers' sense of humor, and that's why it's kind of like No Country for Old Men, just super dark and cynical all the way through, but it's still extremely well done, very well made, and a movie I don't hear a lot of people talking about, especially in Criterion collectors. I'd say definitely seek this one out, since Coen Brothers only have 2 movies available on Criterion, Blood Simple and the other one being Inside Llewyn Davis. Next film is Charade. Charade is just a really awesome, fun 60s comedy crime thriller film. At the time, it was said it was the best Hitchcock movie that Hitchcock never made, and it definitely has a Hitchcock feel. I'd say it's a little bit more tongue-in-cheek than some of his other stuff, but yeah, this is just a really fun, entertaining movie. One of the few like popcorn movies, I'd say, from the Criterion collection. It's just a really easy watch, really entertaining, and Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn are fantastic together. All right, this one was featured in my top 10 favorite Criterion movies. This was my second Criterion film. I was going to say this was my first. I think my first one was Rashomon, but my second one was Hara Kiri. Masaaki Kobayashi in general is a super underrated Criterion director. He made this, he made Quiet In. He also made, one sec, the Human Condition trilogy. Now, this is the standard DVD version, but it was just announced that the Blu-ray version is now being released. So I am super excited for that, and I can't wait to get it. Yeah, but Hara Kiri is unlike any other samurai movie I've ever seen. Most samurai movies I've seen deal with like samurais in battle, in action, in war. This samurai movie questions the honor of the samurai, and it's told in a very unique narrative, and the ending is incredible. Just all around a super underrated movie. One of my favorite Criterion movies ever, since it's in my top 10, and one I don't hear people talk about at all. So if you're a fan of Kurosawa and you have not seen this, or you're not really familiar with this director, check him out. He's fantastic. Next one is a super awesome movie, one of my personal favorites, and that is Brian De Palma's Blowout. Brian De Palma in general, I think, is kind of an underrated director. Yes, he's made some very big movies like Scarface, The Untouchables, Carrie, but a lot of his lesser known films, in particular Blowout and Sisters, which I believe is also available on Criterion, are ones that aren't really talked about that much, and Blowout is probably his best film, maybe my favorite. It was inspired by the movie Blow Up, a film that I own but actually haven't seen yet. And it's very Hitchcock inspired. Brian De Palma loved Hitchcock. Oh, one of his other movies Here's another one that's on Criterion that I just remembered, Dressed to Kill. This is also a really fun movie. A lot of Hitchcock-inspired moments in this one as well. But getting it back to Blowout, this is a movie that is just a super fantastic, well-made thriller, really great camera shots and awesome cinematography, and John Travolta's best performance, tied with Pulp Fiction probably. In fact, Quentin Tarantino loves this movie so much that he was like, I want to work with Travolta. Although originally he wanted John Travolta in From Dusk Till Dawn, John Travolta said he would rather be in Pulp Fiction, and thank goodness for that because he was fantastic in Pulp Fiction. Also, for your Edgar Wright fans out there, this is Edgar Wright's favorite Criterion movie, according to his top 10 Criterion films, so that's pretty cool. I personally love Edgar Wright, but yes, Blowout is fantastic. Check it out. One that I don't hear people talk about that often. All right, the only documentary film that I think I own in general in the Criterion collection, and that is Crumb. So I came across this movie because the director of this film made Ghost World, which is also in my top 10 favorite Criterion films. I'm like, what? I wonder what other films he made. He made Bad Santa, which was surprising to me. And he made this movie Crumb. Crumb is a documentary about the cartoon comic book artist Robert Crumb. And the movie dives into his family history, it dives into his fame and him becoming kind of a really famous underground artist, and it is just a fascinating, fascinating film. It goes deeper into psychological stuff than I was expecting, and just it's a movie that'll make you think, and it's a movie that really goes into the tortured artist. It's fascinating, this movie. The next film is one of the most surprising releases on Criterion, and that is Repo Man. So I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with like Scream Factory movies, but they like to release movies they'll release a lot of John Carpenter movies like The Thing, best horror movie ever. And then they'll release other super awesome action horror movies like Army of Darkness, and a lot more obscure kind of sci-fi horror action films. And Repo Man made more sense to me being released on that forum, but being released on Criterion is also a pleasant surprise. This movie is so awesome. It is so punk rock. I'm kind of a punk rock enthusiast, so the soundtrack to this movie kicks ass. And also, the movie also has a very much kind of a They Live kind of vibe. There's a satirical thing going on in this movie, but it is just a bizarre film for the Criterion collection. That doesn't mean it's bad at all. It makes it super awesome, but it's a movie that I feel like most Criterion people, especially if you're a fan of a lot of the more dramatic art house movies, you might not like this one, but I still think you should check it out because it is one of the most bizarre movies ever, especially for Criterion. I know I keep saying that, but I'm just so surprised that this is on the collection. But Alex Cox is a super awesome director. Sid Nancy is also on the collection. I actually have that in here. And he's a really great director, really awesome visual style. But yes, this movie, you gotta check it out. All right, the next one is one that my mom showed me. Broadcast News. Yeah, this movie is a super hilarious comedy, really awesome direction and writing, and all the acting in it is amazing, especially from Holly Hunter, who really steals the show in this movie. This is one of the more straightforward comedies. When it comes to Criterion movies, there aren't that many like straightforward comedies. There's a lot of the early comedies of like Chaplin or Buster Keaton. There's also like the Jim Jarmusch super dry comedies, and there's a lot of Wes Anderson movies. But when it comes to like a straightforward, just funny comedy with some dramatic moments, Criterion is lacking, and so that's why I'm very grateful for Broadcast News. I think it's a really underrated movie in general, especially for the Criterion collection. It's not one of those movies that I think collectors actively seeked out, but they should, because this is a really fun, lighthearted movie. It kind of breaks up the monotony of a lot of the Criterion films. Yeah, this is a fun movie. Another film that has been mentioned in my top 10, and that is Edward Yang's A Brighter Summer Day. This movie might go in history as the most underrated masterpiece in the history of cinema. Like, I put this movie up there with The Godfather. That's how amazing this movie is to me. I was seriously blown away by this film. And it was a film that was practically lost. For a long time, this was not available for many, many, many years, and that's why I'm so thankful for Criterion, because they're literally bringing lost movies back to life. So this movie looks amazing. I don't want to get too much into the story. I feel like people should go into this movie blind. It's really long. It's 4 hours long, But you can break that up into like 2 hours. Watch 2 hours one day, watch 2 hours the next day. But it's a film that I hardly hear anyone talk about. Criterion collectors, seek this one out, because I can guarantee this one's going to go out of print, and it's going to be one of those like super valuable movies like Chungking Express. This movie is fantastic. Next film is a film by Wim Wenders, and that is The American Friend. So Wim Wenders is a pretty recognizable director in Criterion. He's made Paris, Texas, one of my personal favorites. More recently, the Road trilogy is available on the Criterion Blu-ray, and Until the End of the World is another one. This is probably his most underrated. You have the cinematographer Robbie Mueller, who's probably my favorite cinematographer, who also did the cinematography for Paris, Texas. So the way this movie looks and the camera shots in this movie are amazing. And once again, it's just one of those movies that aren't really talked about. I've never seen a film quite like this. It is one of the strangest thrillers I've ever seen. But Dennis Hopper in particular is really awesome. I've always loved Dennis Hopper. He's just a fantastic actor. But yeah, this is one that I feel like people should seek out. As you can see, it's not been opened yet. I watched it on the Criterion channel, so I need to rewatch this soon. But yeah, this movie, super awesome. And the next one, if I had to pick what was the most underrated, it's probably this film, and that is The Double Life of Veronique. So my #1 favorite film in the Criterion films was the Three Colors trilogy by Krzysztof Kieslowski. I was so blown away by that film that I wanted more from this director. So I went out and I bought Decalogue. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to, I promise. The other one I bought was Blind Chance. And of course there's The Double Life of Veronique. I have seen this also on the Criterion channel, and I was like, this is one of the most beautiful looking films I've ever seen, and it's also one of the most dreamlike. It's one of those movies where it's like, I knew I loved it, but I wasn't 100% certain as to why. It's hard to describe what this movie's about, what it's trying to convey. There's really nothing quite like it, and it just shows the brilliance of Krzysztof Kieslowski as a filmmaker. Seriously amazing. You have Irene Jacob, who has never looked more gorgeous in a film. I mean, she's gorgeous in Red, but here she's just so beautiful. And there's a lot of great camera shots of just a close-up of her face, very angelic. And I can't describe this movie. It's that amazing, it's that cinematic, and it's that underrated. I feel like Criterion collectors would really, really love this movie, especially if you love Decalogue, which is one of the most popular purchases on Criterion by far, especially if you love Three Colors. If you've not seen this movie, please check it out. It is seriously gorgeous. Alright guys, well that's my list of 10 underrated Criterion films. Unfortunately, I did not put clips at the end of each little mini review I did here like I did with my 10 underrated films. That's because a lot of these clips are hard to come by, especially on YouTube. But if any of these films interest you, look them up, look up reviews, look up trailers, do some research, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, feel free to mention some of your underrated Criterion films. What films would you recommend for me or other people who are into the collection? And as always, thanks for watching.